Hello, everyone. I'm here to discuss the current Hulu special that can be found on that app. And it has the producer Rick Rubin talking to Paul McCartney, interviewing him, reminiscing with him, and having a good time together. And this is currently available by, as I understand it, because I'm old school, what do you call it? Downloading the app for Hulu on your television set. It's actually 6 episodes. The 6 episodes are run roughly 30 minutes each, give or take. And the total time, if you watch all of them, is about 3 hours, give or take. And you could binge watch all of them together, as I chose to do in one sitting, or you can just watch them to your heart's content, any way you want, whatever you desire. One episode one day, two or three, another day, whatever. And at first, I wasn't really going to do this because, as I say, I'm from the old school, and much like my grandparents couldn't figure out how to program a VCR, I'm really a little bit lost when it comes to this modern technology. And you don't just get a broadcast TV show, you have to kind of get the app. So it's funny, I was against it originally. And I don't know, I didn't want to go through all the routine of putting a credit card online. I don't like them having that information and all that. And I had some other ways to watch it. I had a couple of people out there offering to download it for me and send it as a file. The problem with that was I didn't know how to get it off my phone and get it onto the big screen TV. So that didn't really work out in the end. I even knew a guy that has seen it and he's going to put it on a DVD at some point, but that wouldn't be for a week or two, so I didn't want to wait that long. Long story short, I decided to just go ahead and take the plunge, and I actually went and put the information online. It's a free trial at the moment. What you can do is you can watch the McCartney special or whatever else you like, and then cancel Hulu before they charge you in a month, which is what I'm going to do. So now that I've spent 2 minutes talking about that, let's get on to the actual show. I was in no hurry to see this. I was in no hurry. As a real Paul fan and Beatle fan who's seen everything they've done and have a whole bunch of movies up here and all kinds of interesting interviews over the decades with Paul, I knew it was probably going to be him telling the same old stories over and over again, so I really wasn't that anxious for it. I could have waited, to tell you the truth. I could have waited a month or longer. I was in no hurry, and most of the people who'd seen it already had told me, it's a mixed bag. So in the end, I watched it though pretty quick, and I decided that I'm glad I did. I had a good time. How much good time did I have? I had enough of a good time that I binged all the episodes together, one after the other, as I said, and I couldn't wait for the next one to start, the next chapter. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to 6. And when it was over, it actually left me wanting more. But having said that, I'm going to be fair, and I'm going to tell you some pros and cons, what I think of it. First of all, to get this out of the way, I know I'm alone in this from what I understand. I'm wondering why they opted to choose a gloomy, dark, black and white, look as if they're Rick Rubin and Paul are in a crypt. I don't understand that. Now, believe me, I'm a fan of old movies. I love movies from the 30s and 40s and 50s. I understand it. I understand glorious black and white. I understand watching Citizen Kane for the art, the beautiful, grays and tones and things. I get that. I just thought it would be nice to be able to see these guys a little better. You really couldn't see them that clearly. I guess it was for the idea that we're taking a trip back to the past and everything's black and white. I don't know. But in the end, it didn't hurt anything. I was just wondering why they opted for that look. But one good thing about it is the fact that this was filmed in black and white actually offset some really nice color photos. And I say color, some color and some definitely colorized. But the colorization wasn't bad on some of these. But there's some nice photographs throughout this. As they're talking and reminiscing, you see photos of, Paul as a youth and the young Beatles and so forth. And it was really nice the way that they were able to colorize some of those. One that stood out to me was the Beatles backstage meeting Little Richard, for example, things like that. So it was really, really a nice touch. A lot of good film clips in here, moments such as Paul McCartney in the studio working on Blackbird in 1968, for example, just pops to mind. So you have a lot of good photos and you have a lot of good film clips interspersed throughout this thing, which I thought really were nice. As far as the chronology of events, that was interesting too. They did not go strict chronological order. They didn't start with Paul as a boy and work his way up to meeting John and getting into the Beatles and then conquering the world and going solo, after the breakup. They didn't do that. They went all over the place. You would have one moment where you'd have Paul talking about a certain Beatles memory, a Beatles song. Then they talk about something maybe from his solo career. Then they bounce back to when he first met Ringo, and Ringo first played and joined the Beatles in Hamburg to sit in for Pete Best, and all over the map. So I like that effect because you didn't know what you were going to get next. You kind of took a ride all around. So I like the fact that it went out of sequence. It wasn't strict chronological order. And throughout this entire special, it's so much fun to see both Rick Rubin, who is obviously a big fan of Paul McCartney and loves Paul's bass playing, and he loves bass himself, Rick, and Paul also, the two of them together with a 4-track machine, I take it, listening to clips fed in of various Paul McCartney solo songs and mostly Beatles songs, and Paul reacting to them. Now, what's a real treat about this is, of course, throughout the course of this, you get a lot of isolated vocals here and there that you never heard that way before for diehard fans. And of course, you get to hear instrumental tracks, just certain parts brought up on the monitor and brought down and different levels. It was really a treat. Anybody who's heard these songs so much as I have and love these songs, really, really going to be blown away by that. There's some good moments in there, and some of the songs that I've jotted down here, for example, they talk about Tomorrow Never Knows, they talk about Nowhere Man, Eleanor Rigby, Penny Lane, Maxwell Silverhammer, Day in the Life, of course, A Hard Day's Night, and little details talking about, like with the Hard Day's Night, the idea that the guitar solo was like played slowly and then sped up fast for the effect on the record, things like that. But where my interest usually lies is when you hear stuff you talked about that you're not really used to all the time. For example, listening to Babies in Black, an early track, and Paul's reaction to that. And Your Bird Can Sing, there's a fantastic moment when they're discussing And Your Bird Can Sing, and you're hearing all different phases of that. I thought it was so cool. Dear Prudence, I'm sure I'm missing some songs. I just have a few here jotted down. One of the ones that was a standout to me is a favorite not many people talk about off the Help album, and that's the song Another Girl. And what I find interesting is that Paul doesn't always remember things well. Hey, look, the man is now 79 years old. He's almost 80. Our memories fade, and that's a long time ago. But what's interesting is that Paul played the lead guitar, for example, on Another Girl. I'm pretty sure of that. And at the end, when Rick Rubin was asking about it, Paul didn't even remember playing lead. He said something like, I think he jokingly said, I don't know if it was me. It probably was because it's so bad, or something like that. There's a lot of times here when Paul shows humility, too. He shows, like, maybe there's like a take of, I don't know if it's Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds or something, where there's maybe an that really was, it was kind of off key. And he said, oh, you see, that's why we don't listen to old tapes. There's a lot of funny moments, a lot of light moments, really entertaining. There were some errors, of course, little things I pick up on, stuff like, I think Rick Rubin suggesting that the Sgt. Pepper album, when you open it up and see that yellow gatefold shot of the Beatles sitting there, that was the first time the Beatles ever did a gatefold, and Paul agrees, yeah. I don't think Paul even remembers. These people don't mull over this stuff over the decades like us diehard fans do. But actually, you could call Beatles for Sale, actually, from '64, a gatefold, really, if you want to get down to it. So Pepper was not technically the first gatefold. Now, other things, like Paul still tells that story that he was adamant, and he told Brian Epstein, we're not going to go to America until we get a #1 record. Because that's why a lot of British acts never did so well. They got to go in as #1. If you go in as #1, you have a better chance. Paul's told this story forever, and I'm glad he believes it. But I'm sure he said that. I'm sure he actually thought that was a great idea, and it is. It's a great idea, great strategy. However, the fact is, Ed Sullivan was booking the Beatles before I Want to Hold Your Hand became #1 in the States. So, take that as you will. One thing, of course, I'm kind of disappointed with in this is that there wasn't enough solo music represented. You know, I'm a big solo music fan of the Beatles, and I didn't like the fact that really all we really talked about in this, we heard them discuss, was Band on the Run, the song, of course, and the album, a little bit about the album, and of course, Maybe I'm Amazed. I should mention what Maybe I'm Amazed is a really exciting, when you hear the track being played, you hear like an extra guitar that Paul mixed out. I don't know if it was an extra guitar or guitar feedback from something, but whatever it was like part of the track, and he mixed it out, much to his credit. It's interesting to hear it, but I'm glad the final version of Maybe I'm Amazed was without that extra guitar sound. Now, as I say, it's with all the solo decades that Paul's had, it's so disappointing not to focus on other things. Well, but two surprises in this particular documentary were when Rick Rubin plays Paul a segment of the song Waterfalls, and Paul comments on that. And what I find interesting is Paul says he thinks that maybe the synths in that kind of ruin it. And Rick Rubin assures him, no, that's what makes it sound modern. And then Paul kind of agrees, oh, okay. And I found that very interesting because we kind of know that Paul seems to lack confidence in some of his less known stuff, or, you know, non-Beatles or non-Band on the Run, you know, non-Tug of War, say, solo projects. So he kind of like doesn't think much of it until he hears somebody else acknowledge it. Then he's, oh, yeah, it wasn't bad. I thought that was interesting, you know. But what really surprised me and shocked me to the core in a positive way is that there was a song, a very obscure song, the B-side of Waterfalls, that was played, and that being Check My Machine, you know, complete, you know, let's have a lark here track that Paul's doing almost a joke in the style of like, you know my name, look up the number by the Beatles. And I love Check My Machine. I think it's delightfully wild and crazy. And Paul seemed to be having fun with it too. I think I noted to myself that of all the tracks that were being played here and sampled with Paul getting into it, and it's so great watching both Paul and Rick getting into it and bopping their heads and humming along and singing along. It seemed like Check My Machine, Paul really was having extra fun with. He seemed to really like that, and I enjoyed that. That was a treat for me. During this special, Paul will go back and talk about things like Ringo, how they first got Ringo, and especially when they first got to play with him, and right away it was magic. We've heard this before, a lot of these stories, but I'm glad he solidified that the fact that a lot of Ringo bashers they say Ringo just got lucky. Well, Paul actually solidifies that Ringo was a professional and the Beatles were more like amateurs, and they were very lucky to get Ringo. John Lennon said the same thing, I recall. Indeed, you know, Paul is very respectful to George. He talks about how George came up with the guitar intro, the guitar bit to "And I Love Her," that really makes the song what it is. But he's already talked about this before, Paul. It's not the first time he's revealed that. But he always is respectful of his other comrades in the Beatles, including John. And it's a nice thing when he's able to give everybody their due. And I want to take a moment to point out especially he gives George Martin constant credit and really builds George Martin up to being, you know, an integral part of their work in the studio. Indeed, folks, George Martin is the only fifth Beatle in my estimation. There is no other. George Martin is the fifth Beatle. And Paul really acknowledges that. He didn't skimp on George's talents and his benefits that he gave the group. So I thought that was terrific. Some other notes that I have here. Here, There, and Everywhere. The song Here, There, and Everywhere, which Paul often says might be his favorite track of his from the Beatles era anyway. Paul's told this story before, and he mixes up the timeline, I think, and a lot of fans agree. You know, he tells a story about how John was never one to give Paul a lot of credit, or any credit, for his songs, but he remembers he was filming the movie Help, he says, with John, and I guess they were in the snow, and they were in a skiing lodge or hotel or something, and they were playing the record, which I guess would have been Revolver, which didn't come out then, and John saying, you know, that was a really good one, that Here, There, Everywhere is a really good one. And Paul was like blown away because he said John would never usually do that. Well, two things. First of all, Paul obviously is getting the timeline wrong. I don't doubt at all. I mean, Paul lived it. I didn't. So obviously, if Paul says this happened, it happened. I believe it. Touched him deeply, and he remembers the moment. However, I think he might have got the timing screwed up for various reasons. I'll let you be the judge when you hear it. And then we'll talk a little bit about probably the biggest surprise, something I'd never heard before. I don't think anybody's ever heard this. I think this is a new revelation that Paul's come up with, and it has to do with the song Come Together. He says that John actually came in, with a Chuck Berry kind of approach to this, very quick, playing it very fast, and kind of like the way Chuck Berry would do it. Of course, John would wind up getting sued because he used the line from, I believe it's You Can't Catch Me, Here Come Old Flat Top. He used that in Come Together, and he got in trouble for that, John did. But Paul says it was really fast, and then Paul said, no, slow it down. That's the first time I ever heard that Paul had a hand in Come Together that large, a whole fist in there, And as I say, this is the kind of thing where I'm always mixed on this, because I believe that Paul McCartney should obviously, if he did something, he should take the credit for it. I mean, I don't believe, and I'm gonna get a lot of people thinking I'm saying Paul's lying. He's not lying. I'm not accusing him of lying. But I wonder why so many things that were never really brought out in some Beatles songs, Paul feels as he's reaching his twilight years and he's coming near the end, it's almost for the sake of preserving his reputation and his legacy. He almost wants to have a hand in all the Beatles stuff. A few years ago, it was Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite. Several years ago, it was like he wanted to say we co-wrote that, actually. Up to that time, most people thought it was a Lennon song, or, mostly a Lennon song. Now we find out that Come Together, the very important pacing of it and groovy style of it, that slow style, is Paul's? I guess so. If it's true, it's true. I'm not saying it's not true. I just don't understand why. It's like, well, it would be as if John was alive and he had to say, I had a big line in Things We Said Today. Or, John was alive and he said, actually, I want everybody to know, I'm trying to think that at Obla Di Obla Da, I was the one who did the piano opening. It's like, I don't know why it's so integral importance to Paul, but it apparently is, for whatever reason. But anyway, there you go. There was a good moment in there that I loved when Rick Rubin was reading a quote from somebody saying how, and I'm just paraphrasing here, Paul's bass playing is so great, and a lot of people are copying that today. They're ripping it off his work in the Beatles, and he's like one of the greats, or something like that. And Paul says, who wrote that? He didn't know who said that, and it was John. He said, John said that, and Paul was touched, and he said, oh, wow, really? He says, I'm glad he said that to someone. He never said it to me. That's another thing I really wonder about, because while he says that a song like Here, There, and Everywhere is the only time that he can recall John ever complimented him on a song, I know that the Beatle fans know, and Paul should know, that John was very vocal about loving Hey Jude, and he was very touched by Hey Jude. In fact, at first when he heard Hey Jude from Paul, he thought it was a message to John. Hey John, he thought it was about him. Paul would say, no, it's not. But he I know he complimented Paul on Hey Jude, but there you go. Anyway, I'm kind of praising this thing. I have to say, though, but in final summation, this is more special for casual fans, meaning that if you're a casual fan, if you're a younger fan, maybe you haven't heard everything, you're likely to learn a lot more, obviously. Just like I thought, it's exactly what I figured it was going to be. This is pretty much stuff we know already. The diehard fans, it's not for us per se. There were a few nuggets in there, stuff that us diehards will say, wow, I didn't know that before. That's something new. But for the most part, it's just the same kind of stuff, talking about how he wrote Yesterday and about how John helped him with the song getting better. The usual Paul stories. So more of an asset, I think, for beginners, casual fans. If you're a beginner or a casual fan, you must see this. It's essential viewing. For the rest of us, I would definitely recommend a watch. I don't think, even if you've heard some of these or most of these before, 75-80% of this before, it's still an enjoyable time, a good trip down memory lane, if you like. And it's definitely worth a rewatch, too. I'm going to be owning it for my collection, one way or the other. Thanks, everybody.